Hello! So as you have probably gathered already, in today's video we're going to be doing a full, complete, no bits missing reptile room tour. Now, as well as just being the tour of everything, this video is potentially going to be a little bit important because what's going to be happening in future videos and when those future videos are going to be appearing is a little bit unknown at the minute. So if you are subscribed to the channel, then make sure that you do stick around till the end, because I will be talking about a couple of important things, but the majority of you are not interested in any of that, so let's get on with things. Now, since the last reptile room tour I did, the biggest and most obvious change is that we do have this large planted enclosure right in the top at the middle there that I'm just focusing in on. Now, I appreciate that me subscribers might be sick to the back teeth of seeing this enclosure, because I have been doing lots of videos on it recently on how I've set it up and all that, but given that it wasn't here in the last tour, I think it would be right to start off with this one. Now, this enclosure, which I'll give you a complete rundown of in a second, houses my two western green lizards that I got on the 21st of August from Celtic Reptile and Amphibian. Now, there are only two in this enclosure, and I did start off with three, which unfortunately tells you that I did have one die. Now, I'm going to be completely glass clear with you on this, on what happened there, is that basically the two that I've got in here now, when I got them all, these two were active and hungry, but the third one just wouldn't eat. From day one, it wouldn't eat. I got it on a Friday, and by the Wednesday, the immediate Wednesday after that, it had died. Now, given how well the other two have been doing, me, Harvey and Tom from Celtic Reptile and Amphibian don't think it's anything to do with my setup, and also it wouldn't be fair to say that it was their fault. We think that just because it was a young lizard, it was just one of those that is doomed to die from some developmental issue or something. But yeah, these two here, they don't have any names yet, because they are small and I don't know what sex they're going to end up being. But some interesting little things about them is that if you see this one on the right there, you can see that it's got stripes already. There's some dashed striping on the lower flanks and some perfect pin striping along the dorsum, whereas the other one over here has barely any striping at all. That striping typically only develops once they're a couple of months old, but the one on the right, which I'm just referring to as stripy for now, that was actually born with that pattern, and this has led to some really interesting social interaction. So although the plain lizard on the left there is bigger and actually a lot bolder than the stripy one on the right, it seems to be the case that the stripy one is dominant. I will see from the plain one, jumping down there, lots of arm waving behaviour. So what they'll do is they'll cycle the front legs round and round as a sign of submission, and when he or she is doing that, the stripy counterpart over here will often sort of inflate the neck and throat area. Now, I think that this might be happening because this one, being stripy, looks older than it is, and so perhaps it has some sort of, as a consequence of that, the other lizard, which looks more juvenile, that is being submissive to it, because in nature, when a stripy individual is seen, it's usually going to be older than the non-striped individual, even though these are born at almost exactly the same time. So I think that it's sort of tricking the non-stripy lizard into thinking that this one is older and therefore stronger and more aggressive. Now, you will have noted, if you've been keeping up with these lizards from when I got them, that they have grown an absolute ton, and that is because I have been feeding them twice a day, every single day, and they are not shy about coming to get food at all. I mean, they're generally just not shy whatsoever. As you can see, I'm talking quite loud, and they are not hiding or anything like that, which is nice. But anyway, my aim with the incredible food drive is to try and get them hand tame, which is not something that people typically do with western green lizards. Thus far it is going very, very well, and the lizards are more than happy to run over onto my hands to get mealworms, which alongside spiders do seem to be their favourite things to eat. So this enclosure is just larger than 4x2x2 feet. It's like an extra inch longer and another 4 inches taller or something like that. I'll throw up all the dimensions on a couple of different units on the screen so you can get an idea. Now the background took several days to make and I made it like a half an hour long video on it. This back here is actually all real rock. It is a completely real rock stack. And all this wooden stuff, again, that is all real. Most of it is cork bark, but there are also some like branches that are collected thrown in there too. Now one thing I will point out with this enclosure is that the last time I did a reptile room tour, I mentioned that I was going to be getting an all glass enclosure and it was going to be like a sort of tropical setup and that was going to be highly planted and highly humid and things. But the plan for that sort of didn't work out as I was intending, and so I did this, which was plan B, and actually I am really glad that I've ended up doing this because I think this is better than what I had in mind. Now, running with the theme of big updates, it would be most appropriate next, I think, to take a look at the leopard geckos. Now, I say leopard geckos plural purposefully there, because all of the leopard geckos are now together in this one enclosure. Now, if you were keeping up with my videos from the previous tour and before, you will know that I did get 2 female leopard geckos, and the plan was to move them into this enclosure with my male leopard gecko Speckles. And that is precisely what I've done. Now, this is the first time that I will be announcing this on my own YouTube channel, so I suppose it is a bit of big news. I am intending on making a full video of how I introduced them to each other and what happened with that. So this is sort of like a bit of a premature update for the leopard geckos, really. Now, aside from a tiny little bit of squabbling between Dottie, who is a female, and I am showing you now, and the male Speckles, who I'm sure will come out in a minute, like I say, apart from a little bit of spatting between them around feeding time, all 3 of the geckos have been getting on really, really well. It's important for me to stress that I am not recommending cohabiting leopard geckos because in the majority of cases, people don't know how to keep one leopard gecko properly. And so when you add several into the mix, things just get worse. But with that being said, if you've got a large enough enclosure and you are providing your leopard geckos with everything they need, including proper heating and lighting, because these are not animals which just permanently live down in caves, and so they do have useful interactions with radiation, then in this instance, keeping them together is not only not really going to cause any problems in the majority of cases, but it could actually be quite beneficial to them. But this is all a topic for when I do the full update on moving these geckos together. Behind this vent up here, there is actually a fan for preventing the air within this enclosure from becoming too warm, which is a part of the actual proper temperature control in Vivaria, which I have discussed in another recent video and have implemented into all my enclosures. So there are actually fans drawing the air out of all of them in this room now. Now, jumping right over here, we do have my bearded dragon Char. Char is in a 5x2x2 foot enclosure, just like my corn snake, which I'll show you in a minute. As ever, I've had a go at trying to accommodate the reptiles' desires for physical enrichment, as they call it, by introducing lots of branches and bits of things for him to climb over in here. But I haven't gone too overboard with this one, because in my experience it does seem to be the case that bearded dragons do like to have a bit of free room just to move about, rather than having too much clutter or whatever you want to call it in there. Now, Char is at the time of year where he is really starting to go off his food and he is much less active, and actually now it seems to be that he's going to start having a dig. He has made one burrow there already, and that is in preparation for brumation. Like all of the rest of the reptiles in this room, my bearded dragon chart will be going down for a several month hibernation period, and so he will be completely out of action over the winter. Now admittedly it is really boring when your reptiles go into hibernation or brumation, however you want to say it, but it is also handy because it allows you to do lots of maintenance in their enclosures without upsetting them. Now in this instance what I'm going to be doing, I think, is taking all of the lights out of this enclosure and rearranging them, maybe changing one or two of them, changing bulbs, things like that over the winter, just so that I've got all of the lamps together and they're making a proper basking zone rather than being all spread out and higgledy-piggledy like this. I aim to have it so that the majority of the lamps, the really important ones, are all sort of pointing down towards a main basking zone like I've got it in my western green lizard enclosure here. But yeah, aside from that, Char is doing really well, and another thing that is doing really well in this enclosure is actually this succulent here. This is just a mother-in-law's tongue, or what do you call them again, Sansevieria. And since last time it has grown enormous, which I think is just a change of adding this Jungle Dawn LED bar up here. Which is not a sponsored plug, by the way, so don't make those accusations. Now one thing you will notice in this enclosure, and also my corn snake's enclosure over here as we come to take a look at it, is that there are lots of vertical branches in these setups. Now these branches, as well as just looking sort of cool, do actually serve a functional purpose, because they are actually supporting the tops of these enclosures against the weight of these ones above. So for all those people who are worrying about the enormous weight of this real rock stack and all the cork bark and stuff that I've got in this enclosure, those vertical branches are what is making that possible. As I said before, my corn snake's enclosure is the same dimensions as my bearded dragon's one. This one is really very well bioactive. Lots of the custodian populations, all the woodlice, springtails and so on, do really well in here. Despite being constantly climbed on by my corn snake, you can see that the branches that I added back in May, I think it was, are still nice and sturdy. So the little hack that I did by using the little bits of black painted MDF as sort of adapters to attach these branches to the walls of the enclosure, has worked really well. Old time viewers of the channel may well just remember that I did originally have plants in this enclosure, but I took them out because this little monster here kept digging them up. But what I actually did with them is I put them in pots and grew them on for ages and ages so that they had a really nice big root ball and they would be more difficult to dig up. And then I have actually planted one of them back in the enclosure here. These mother-in-law's tongues are really one of the hardiest plants that I have ever tried to grow in an enclosure, and even with all the roots destroyed by my corn snake red, they were actually growing in here. So now that I've got a good root ball on that, I think it should do really quite well. Another main change to this enclosure is that I do have a piece of slate and some other stony thingy there, with bits of clay on it and so on, which is allowing me to take the actual temperature measurements that I want to, and of course is a better basking site for me corn snake than the little bit of cork bark he had was. Are you going to come out for us, Red? You usually come out when you're interested. This is the problem, you see. Whenever I'm not filming, he's always coming out the bloody doors and getting in the road. But then when I do want to film him, he just stays in there nice and nervous, don't you? Like butter wouldn't melt. The final two enclosures in this reptile room are the two for my Chinese leopard snakes. Now these two snakes are of a species that most people haven't heard of. I do refer to them as Chinese leopard snakes, but most people call them twin spot rat snakes. The reason why I choose to use the alternative name is that they aren't really twin spotted, and twin spot rat snake doesn't really tell you as much about them, at least not accurately, as Chinese leopard snake does, because in my opinion the pattern looks more leopard like than twin spotted, and they do come from China, so that's that one. You'll notice that since last time there are a lot more branches in this enclosure. This might go out of focus now, but if I just try and show you what it is like in the very back, there are actually branches going right the way back there, and same for this enclosure. Before this, these enclosures were relatively bare, and I didn't really like them, to be honest, but adding the branches in does give these snakes some climbing opportunities, which when they very rarely come out in front of me, I do see them using, and of course it is a lot more cover, so hopefully they won't feel as timid as they did before. Now I say that they're timid and shy and all that, but actually throughout this year, both of these snakes have completely changed in their feeding habits. So at the start of the year, neither of them would actually eat in front of me, and I just had to leave the mice in and then come in to check if they disappeared later on. But actually they've become really bold now, and both of them will come and strike and take the food from the tongs, so that's a nice change. But only to a point, because the female here, which I'm showing you now, is actually a bit too food aggressive, and she actually bit me the other day, which is quite funny. The other important thing for me to say about these two is that in the gap of time between the last reptile room tour and now, I did try putting these snakes together to see how they'd work out kept together, but that wasn't really going well. The male here, Rusty, was chasing the female up here, whose name is Chloe. He was chasing her around a lot, and it just seemed to be not very harmonious, so I did ultimately separate. But yeah, that sums up the main reptile room here, so why don't we go and take a look at the other enclosures which I've got in another room. So here we are then. So in here we've got my two tropical species of reptiles, being my Crested Gecko over there on the right, and my lined day geckos there on the left. So my Crested Gecko's enclosure over here is a 45 by 45 by 60 centimetre exoterra. As is blindingly obvious, it is live planted, so it's got some devil's ivy in it, which I hacked back a while ago, and has come back, and it's come back with the nice marbled pattern, which I quite like. There is an anthurium, which is this red flower, like right up close. There are some more red flowers just nestled in there with the main part of the plant. And then, of course, the star attraction for the plants really is this Nerogelia bromeliad here, which is blushing absolutely fantastically, and so is that gorgeous pink colour. For once, Splat the Crested Gecko is actually out for you to see him, but he's not really out because he wants to be out. I was just cleaning the glass on the day gecko enclosure there, ready for filming, and somehow I think that's disturbed him, so he's come out and is not in the best of moods. Apart from that though, Splat is doing really well, as ever. If you tuned in last time, I think it was then in the previous reptile room tour that I said that I wasn't that sure about whether I really wanted to keep Splat, because in all honesty I don't really see him. He's awake at a time of the day that I am not, so I don't really see him when he's at his most active. He's really over aggressive with food, so it sort of makes it a worry that he's going to fly out the enclosure and disappear whenever I'm feeding him, which is really awkward because he also really hates being handled, always has done, and so it's not like I can just grab him or anything. He really would not like that. Now obviously, despite all of these things, I have not gotten rid of Splat, or sold him so to speak, because I don't really feel like right in getting rid of an animal that I have raised since he was so little. I mean, if there were to be someone that I could sell him to, that I would know for a fact would have all the proper heating and lighting, and perhaps would have a larger enclosure than this, so that he could have a better life than he's got here, and that person that was getting him would be able to enjoy him more than I do, perhaps because they are a late nighter, whereas I am not, and so they'd see him active, then I would be open to the idea of it. It's just I haven't really had the time to go searching for which person that might be. So for the time being, Splat's staying with me, and I'll just keep looking after him, and he'll just keep doing well, I presume. It's just that I'm not getting that much enjoyment out of him as maybe I would if I had used this enclosure for something else, but we live and learn. Now over here with the day gecko enclosure, we do have another little bit of a sob story, to be totally honest with you, because I don't see these geckos either. I've explained all this before, but when I first got the line day geckos, they were dead bold and they would always be out and active, and I'd always see them, and you could come in the room and make as much noise as you liked and they wouldn't hide away. But at the start of this year, and sort of the end of last year, so early 2020 and late 2019, I did loads with changing the heating and lighting around, and I think that just upset the geckos, and since then they've never regained the trust with me. Now I think a major problem with this enclosure is that firstly it's too small for me to be able to go in it and with me hands and sort of try and hand feed them properly like I do with me western green lizards, for example, because by the time I put my hands in here, you know, I'll just show you now, it's like taking up the whole enclosure, and the geckos probably feel that they can't escape, so trying to bribe them with food isn't really going to work because they just get afraid of me. The other problem with this enclosure being small is that it is really quite below normal eye level. So if I bring you up to my eye level, which is right about here I would say, then you're looking right down on the enclosure. So if I walk in the room, it's like I'm coming down on the geckos, and I think that does frighten them. Now again, thinking of the western green lizards, is that my two youngsters are not afraid of me at all in the enclosure that I've got them in now. But when I actually went to visit Celtic Reptile and Amphibian, and those two youngsters were in an outdoor enclosure which was down on the ground, actually when I was there visiting a couple of videos ago, we never saw those lizards at all because they were scared of us and hiding. But then moving them into that big enclosure that's much higher up, they're suddenly not afraid anymore. So I've got a feeling that if I could move these lined day geckos into a larger, taller enclosure, then it should be possible for me to work with them again so that they become unafraid. I'd want to do something like really properly big, like one of the biggest size exoterras you can get, for example, 3 feet long, 3 feet tall and 45 centimetres front to back, which would be an absolutely enormous, brilliant upgrade for the geckos, but will cost a lot. So for the time being, I think this enclosure is just going to have to stay, and the geckos are going to have to stay shy, and hopefully at some point in the future I kind of saved up and have the time to get on with that bigger enclosure. But yeah, for these geckos, that is basically it. So having completed the reptile room tour as promised, I've now got a few little messages just to give you as to some stuff that is going to be happening. I might be stopping YouTube. But not forever. Don't go. Don't click off. Don't unsubscribe. All will be explained. As it happens, I am actually 18 and I have finished compulsory education, which means that going forward I have two options. Either start living my life and get a job, or continue education by going to university, and I'm going to be doing the latter. Now in going to university, the university I'm going to Cambridge to study biology so that I can do more reptile stuff. Yay! But that entails being away from home for 3 8-week chunks of the year. So there's 24 weeks of the year that I am not going to be here anymore for the next 3 years at least, which means that filming videos in those periods is going to be a little bit tricky. By the time that you're seeing this video, I've probably already left actually, because at the time of filming I will be going in a fortnight, so a fortnight today will be my first full day there, which is a little bit scary. But basically what I'm saying here is that I don't think I'm going to get more time to film another video before I leave, so this video is potentially the last one that you're going to get before I'm on my Christmas break. Now saying that, I have actually got a couple of videos that are sort of filmed, and I've got to film like talking bits for them and so on. So I've got the one of adding all the leopard geckos into there. I've got one on some little snake feeding experiment thingy I was doing, and I've also got one on bearded dragon brumation, which I've been filming clips for over a year now. So potentially there's a couple of videos there that I might be making, and actually the difference that yous notice in my uploading schedule might not actually end up being that enormous. But still, I wanted to point out that if I do end up disappearing, that's the reason why. But anyway, I do really hope that you have enjoyed this video, and if you did, then you will subscribe so that you don't miss out on any future uploads I do. So for now, I've been JTB Reptiles, teaching you how to follow nature's example, and this is me, over and out.